Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to be talking about the history of the telephone. Let's start with a quick overview of the history of this essential device. The telephone is one of the most important inventions of modern times. It has revolutionized the way we communicate with one another and has allowed us to stay connected even when we are not in the same country. The history of the telephone goes back to the late 19th century when a number of inventors began experimenting with ways to transmit voice over wires. The earliest attempts were not very successful, but the invention of the telephone was eventually perfected by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876. Since then, the telephone has become an integral part of our lives. Today, we use the telephone to communicate with family and friends, to conduct business, and even to access the internet. The history of the telephone is fascinating, and in this video, we'll take a look at some of the key moments in its development. Early experiments. The first experiments with transmitting sound over wires date back to the 1790s. These experiments were conducted by a number of inventors, including Italian scientist Giovanni Caselli, who developed a system known as the pantelegraph. This system used a series of electromagnets to transmit signals over a wire. However, these early experiments were not successful in transmitting voices. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that inventors began to make progress in this area. In 1854, physicist Johann Philipp Reis developed an early version of the telephone, known as the Reis telephone. This device was capable of transmitting sounds, but the quality was poor and the device had limited range. Alexander Graham Bell. In 1875, Alexander Graham Bell began experimenting with ways to transmit voice. Bell was a Scottish-born inventor and teacher who had experience with the telegraph, and he believed he could improve upon Reis' device. On March 10, 1876, Bell successfully transmitted the world's first telephone call from his laboratory in Boston. Bell's invention was an immediate success, and soon other inventors began to develop their own versions of the telephone. Among these were Elisha Gray, who developed a competing device known as the harmonic telegraph, and Thomas Edison, who developed the carbon microphone in 1877. The telephone network. In 1877, the first telephone exchange was established in New Haven, Connecticut. This exchange consisted of just a few telephones, but it was the beginning of a nationwide network that would eventually connect millions of people. By the late 19th century, telephone networks had been established in major cities across the United States. The development of the telephone network was a major step forward for communication. It allowed people to make long-distance calls and to access a variety of services, such as directory assistance, telephone operators, and more. The 20th century. In the early part of the 20th century, the telephone network continued to expand. By the 1930s, telephones had become common in homes, and the invention of the rotary dial allowed for faster and easier dialing of numbers. In the 1950s and 1960s, the telephone underwent a number of technological advancements. Touchtone dialing was introduced, as well as direct dialing of long-distance numbers. In the 1970s, the first cellular phones were introduced, ushering in a new era of wireless communication. Today, the telephone has evolved into a powerful communication device. We use it to make calls, send texts, access the internet, and much more. The telephone has come a long way since Alexander Graham Bell first invented it in 1876, and it is now an essential part of our lives. We hope this video has given you an interesting look into the history of the telephone. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic, so leave us a comment below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.